Sometimes we just can't find it on its own roots, and it's so desirable, but I always prefer it on its own roots.
Is it as hardy as Knockout?
It seems to me to be. Okay. Knockout is a profuse bloomer, but I'm not going to tell you Knockout's a real hardy rose. I've got some of them in my own landscape, and in the drought last year, they were wimps. I had to water them 3 times as often as I watered Julia Child or Belinda's Dream or some of the others. And they're a profuse bloomer, but I don't think they're going to be a real hardy rose. They take more care.
Like black spot and stuff like that.
You want to see some black spot on a... Yeah, they do get black spot. But we'll talk about diseases in just a little while. Every rose out there gets some disease, with maybe the exception of Lady Banks. I can't say I've ever seen, much disease on Lady Banks. But having a disease and having it have a severe effect on your roses are 2 different things. I'm going to tell you, number 1, in a minute, how to reduce your probability of having disease. But I'm also going to tell you, don't sweat it if you do. The old-fashioned roses and own-root roses, if they get a little black spot on their leaves, they just drop those leaves and go right on growing. Some of the wimpier roses and some of the grafted roses, they get black spot. They may fold up and die on you. But it's not a serious problem with most of the roses. It can be somewhat unsightly. But we'll come back and talk about diseases in just a minute or 2. Okay. Any other questions before we...
Is there a maximum amount of pruning as a percentage of the plant that you'd recommend?
I recommend really fairly light pruning, just to take it down to heavier wood. But now, anybody here in the Rose Society in San Antonio, I don't want to step on too many toes here. Come on in, sit down. There are more places. If you were going to enter a rose in a contest, you want the biggest, most beautiful rose in the whole world. They butcher those plants back to a fraction of their size, and basically they want to get 1 rose on that plant. And they'll cut off all the other growth, they'll cut off all the other buds, so the plant literally puts all of its energy into making 1 big, beautiful bloom. And then they cut that bloom, and then they take it to the show, and they've got this poor little butchered up rose back here, but they got 1 big, pretty flower off of it. So you can prune them as heavily as you want. I tend to go for quantity as opposed to, having the 1 individual perfect rose. My luck is, if I were going to have 1 individual perfect rose the night before, a squirrel would come through and eat the bud. We used to find that in orchids. I mean, we have trained snails. They can go through the greenhouse and pick the finest bloom in the greenhouse and eat it the night before the show. But, so, long answer to a short question. There's no real maximum or minimum. And remember, these things, the original rose varieties grew in nature for thousands of years, and nobody ever pruned them except Mother Nature, who did it with windstorms and, hailstorms and things like that. So pruning is something we really do for our own benefit. Now, if you're going to grow grafted roses, yes, you need to prune those heavily to encourage new growth to come out from the base. But on-root roses, pruning is pretty much up to you, and it's done mainly to control shape and size. Yes, sir.
How about miniature roses? What's their lifespan? You treat them the same way as you do the
The miniature roses are neat bushes, and you get that little miniature in a pot this big. You plant it in the ground, it's going to grow about like so. They don't seem to be quite as strong. My experience is 12-15 years is about how long they usually last. But they can certainly be grown in the ground. They don't have to be kept in pots. Yes, sir.
The kind of roses you buy for like Valentine's Day long stem roses, are those bush roses or are they?
They're bush roses.
Was that a bush rose?
Now they are heavily pruned to produce fewer flowers. They are pruned. Imagine fishnet or volleyball net with openings about this big in it. They literally stretch this net out across this bed that has the roses growing in it. And every few days they raise it a few inches so that you're getting these real strong straight stems to come up. And then they go through and cut them off down low. Also, the roses that you are buying at Valentine's Day or whenever, virtually none of them are grown in this country anymore. Most all of them are grown at much higher altitude and grown under much cooler conditions. Some of the prettiest roses now are coming out of Mexico, and a lot of them are coming out of South America. Most of the roses in this country used to be grown in Indiana, grown for cut roses. don't think I've ever even been to Indiana, but in, you know, much cooler conditions.
Right.
And they're very laborious to grow, and that's one thing that makes them fairly expensive. I've never seen why anybody would pay more for a dozen roses cut than you could buy 5 or 6 plants from. But anyway, that's a good marketing job by the American Rose Association. Yes, ma'am.
Would you discuss a little more the root system? The reason I'm asking is I had a butterfly bush, and we got a load of dirt, and there was one pile that we didn't end up spreading. So I put it in there, and I mean, it got, you know, a pretty nice size, and it just died. So I don't know if the root system got real shallow on the mound part that came up, and then it got to the part where it was...
That, or it could have just been crappy soil.
Okay.
You know, the soil that you buy is rarely finished. It usually has unfinished compost in it. It just won't grow. As I said, roses have a somewhat delicate root system, and sometimes if they're in bad soil, the root system just can't handle the soil.
Because I put the Esperanza in the same spot the next year, and it's like 6 feet, 8 feet tall.
And you probably could have gone back the next year and put a rose in there and done okay. Sometimes soil just needs to mature for a year or so before you go and stick a rose.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, when we plant them, does it need to be in a level area?
Not necessarily.
Okay, because I have another one that I need to put in the ground.
Yeah,
so.
Roses have a fibrous root system. It's going to spread very widely, other than making sure that it never dries out. There's not a whole lot of other precautions.
But that it stays close to the surface. They don't go real deep like a
Depends on
shrub.
how good or bad the soil is.
Okay.
In deep soil, the roots will go fairly deep, and they'll grow fairly wide. That's what makes them drought tolerant.
Okay, okay.
Okay, when you're feeding those kind of roots, I have in the past, these are established roses. I aim for like 12-inch radius around the base of the flower. Should I be like 5 feet?
If it's a miniature rose that's only 6 inches in diameter, then a 12-inch radius is fine. If the rose is this tall, the root system is like this. If it's a mutabilis, it's as high as a ceiling. The roots are as far as the edges of this seminar area.
Next question, pertaining to the fertilizing, I have thrown out the color essentials and the color landscape, I think equally.
Yeah.
I'm never sure, is there such a thing as too much? I'm putting big chunks of scoops and big piles of this stuff, other than expensive. I mean, am I doing anything bad?
I don't. No, you're doing good things. Buy as many bags as possible. It would be hard to overdo it. You put on more than the plants need, and that, you know, does have an economic impact. But organic fertilizers just don't burn. I mean, you get the chemical rose foods and things, and you can burn the heck out of plants if you put too much. I generally tell people that for most roses, 1 to 3 cups on average is about how much fertilizer they will take. Yeah. Now, if you have a huge plant like a mutabilis, yeah, you probably may use 10 cups of fertilizer around that. But again, the average mutabilis that's been in the ground 3 years will be about as wide as from this post to this post right here. And yeah, they grow quickly. Roses, if you get good plants and take care of them, they get big in a hurry, and if you're not pruning it too heavily.
Bob, were you just saying 2 or 3 cups of what kind? Are you talking about?
Okay, we'll get into culture a little bit here.
Which thing were you referring to there? What kind of fertilizer?
We, in general, because roses are one of those plants that you want to have, because they're perennials, you want to have a fertilizer that is good for growth as well as a fertilizer that's good for flowering. If you've got an annual and all you're caring about is flowering, then a fertilizer strictly for flowering plants is fine. We've gotten to where we mix the color essentials with what we now call landscape essentials, the Medina fertilizer. We mix them half and half. And we're doing that same thing when we first plant bedding plants. And after seeing the results it has been producing, we're starting to call that our miracle mix, just half and half, with something for color like the Rose Glow. Of course, our color essentials is just Rose Glow with stuff added to it. And just mixing that half and half. To me, that is a better fertilizer for roses than using either one of them by itself.
Rose Glow and what?
The rose, well, we call it color essentials, and mix that with the basic Medina fertilizer. They call it growing green. We call it landscape essentials. It's their growing green with a little bit more added to it. That's what we do. If many of y'all have heard me say this, but when we find a product that we really love,